Over the last 60 or more years, export of Japanese films, anime, and video games has created a uniquely dedicated audience for J-entertainment in the West. This may be due to the fact that pretty much everything that comes out of Japan is unmistakably Japanese. Japan's unique cultural signature is evident on its films, video games, manga, and other entertainment exports. The through line that connects all these things, and perhaps the reason for their dedicated international fan base, is the Japanese storytelling style. Every culture has its own storytelling style, but Japan's style has some especially unique aspects that defy even the sensibilities of other Asian countries, let alone the West. These aspects have fascinated me for years, so in this video I will explain some of my thoughts and observations on the subject. Because there is too much to cover in a single video, I will only cover one aspect of the Japanese storytelling style in this video. But if you enjoy the video, please like it and subscribe, and I will cover more aspects of Japanese storytelling in future videos. Or, if you'd like to see a video covering the storytelling style of another country or culture, let me know what it is in the comments below. So, let's get started. One of the most distinct and interesting aspects of Japanese storytelling is what I like to call savoring the moment. This is when the narrative slows down or seemingly halts in order to allow the audience time to truly experience a moment in the story. Japan is not the only culture that uses slow-paced storytelling. For example, European New Wave cinema is full of slow-paced narratives and long takes. But often in the West, storytellers will use this technique to highlight a section of the story in a more calculated, emotionally sensitive way. In Japanese storytelling, however, the technique is not necessarily intended to draw attention to a particular plot point, but often to allow the audience time to contemplate and fully experience the beauty within that brief moment of the story. While there are examples of similar techniques in Western storytelling, these are not the norm. For instance, Terrence Malick's films don't adhere to the standard Western storytelling style. They are an exception to it. In Japan, however, it's surprising how prevalent savoring the moment is in pretty much all types of art and entertainment. Even mediums that are seemingly unsuited to it, like video games and anime. It is likely this storytelling sensibility is derived in part from Japan's Zen Buddhist tradition, as well as from its indigenous religion, Shinto. Zen Buddhism places an emphasis on the practice of meditation, and through it, the development of a heightened but peaceful awareness, free from the clutter and distraction of thought. In other words, it provides a method toward truly experiencing the moment. Zen Buddhism influenced many of Japan's most important traditional poets, artists, and storytellers, like Yoshida Kenko, Matsuo Basho, and Sesshu Toyo. The word Zen is derived from an Indian word meaning meditation, so perhaps savoring the moment includes a kind of meditative mindset. Shinto is similar to Zen Buddhism in that it is more of a practice than a dogmatic belief system or doctrine. The goal of Shinto is to live in harmony with the spirits that inhabit the natural world, known as kami. While Zen Buddhism is highly ritualistic, Shinto emphasizes ritual even more so. In fact, the practice of Shinto is almost exclusively comprised of rituals, with very little else. Shinto does contain a massive pantheon of gods, but the rituals associated with these gods are far more important than belief in the gods themselves. Rituals reinforce the philosophical value of Shinto, which simply put is a respect and reverence for the world we inhabit. Today, Zen and Shinto sensibilities are simply an implicit aspect of Japanese culture and art. As such, the influence they have had on Japanese storytelling is considerable, even if it isn't always intentional.
いつの御代のことでしょう。女語行為があまたお仕えしておりました。
Before we look at contemporary storytellers, let's look at their roots in traditional Japanese literature. For example, the haikus of Japan's most revered poet from the Edo period, Matsuo Basho.
ゆく雲を寝ていてみるや夏らしきやは。
Translation: A summer room, where, lying down, I see the clouds as they go past. While seemingly simple, this poem follows a strict structure and rule set, including its season-specific imagery and contrasting final phrase, which reveals a new perspective on the previous two. Basho often uses a play on words, or juxtaposition that can be a bit whimsical, but the imagery also evokes beauty from fleeting details and momentary impressions, which allude to a more profound emotion, one which is difficult to define. In order to attempt to define it, we have to look at another seminal work in Japanese literature from an earlier era, the Heian period. The Tale of Genji was written by Murasaki Shikibu, a lady-in-waiting at the imperial court during the early 11th century, and it is considered by some to be the first novel ever written. The tale chronicles the life and many lovers of Hikaru Genji, a man of royal lineage who is passed over by the court and instead serves as an imperial officer. Although a work of fiction, it provides a deep insight into the aristocratic class of the Heian period, their values, and the specific kind of beauty they prized most. The emotion linked with this beauty was called aware, and there are many references to it in the Tale of Genji. Later, this became known as mono no aware, which roughly translates as a pathos toward things. This doesn't make a lot of sense in English, and in fact, most experts believe the phrase is untranslatable from the Japanese. In essence, it is an awareness of the beauty of impermanence. To go further, it is also a kind of emotional atmosphere that English words like longing, melancholy, sentimentality, or nostalgia might touch on, but not truly capture. Perhaps the indefinable, enigmatic quality of this emotion is in part the reason it was so prized in the Heian period, and remains so in Japanese literature and art. Savoring the Moment is not meant to be a translation of mono no aware, because I don't believe I can truly define it. However, I believe that the technique I am attempting to define, the slow, peaceful moments in Japanese stories, do often evoke mono no aware, and it could be this unique sense of beauty that gives these moments their unmistakably Japanese flavor. To truly experience and savor a moment, you must be aware of its impermanence. Every moment is fleeting, and to acknowledge this is to acknowledge a kind of sadness, but there is also beauty within that sadness, or a bittersweet sentimentality, if you will. As there would be no happiness without sadness to give it meaning, there would be no beauty in a moment if it lasted forever. When Japanese stories take time to savor the moment, they are doing so with a full awareness and appreciation for the impermanence of that moment. I really hope I'm not getting too sappy for you here. Just stay with me, I'll try to ease up on the sap, I promise. The Tale of Genji and the haikus of Matsuo Basho are hundreds of years old, and yet the sentiments they contain are still present in contemporary Japanese literature. For example, the novels of Japan's most revered contemporary author, Haruki Murakami. In his novel, What I Write About When I Write About Running, Murakami states, no matter how mundane some action might appear, keep at it long enough and it becomes a contemplative, even meditative act. This Zen-like sensibility permeates much of Murakami's work. His 1987 novel Norwegian Wood is a contemplation of memory and its legacy as time passes. The narrator recalls a relationship from his youth that develops while he and his friend Naoko take a series of walks through Tokyo. The walks take on a meditative, ritualistic quality in the novel, and because they are viewed through the prism of memory, they are also highly nostalgic, perhaps evoking a kind of mono no aware. In this passage from the novel, the protagonist writes a letter. Afternoons are quiet, peaceful, and for me, lonely. I read books or listen to music. Sometimes I think back on the different routes we used to take on our Sunday walks around Tokyo. I can come up with a pretty clear picture of the clothes you were wearing on any particular walk. I remember all kinds of things on Sunday afternoons. Although Murakami is a contemporary author with some definite Western influences, his novels incorporate themes and aesthetics drawn from traditional Japanese literature as well. But what about more modern mediums like film? Early Japanese cinema delved into several different genres, most prominently adaptations of kabuki theater. However, Japan didn't truly develop its own unique cinematic voice until the early work of filmmakers like Tienosuke Kinugasa, Kenji Mizoguchi, and Yasujiro Ozu. Of course, the early days of Japanese cinema were chock full of some fast-paced samurai action, but filmmakers like Ozu began to introduce a slower, more meditative narrative style. In this final shot of Ozu's iconic 1953 film, Tokyo Story, an old man sits on a tatami mat, fanning himself while looking out at the channel that his house overlooks. We are meant to see the character's loneliness and isolation in this moment, but also as he reflects on his life, his purpose, and those he has lost, we do the same. This moment is melancholy, but there is also a kind of beauty behind the sadness. One of Ozu's contemporaries, Akira Kurosawa, achieves a similar effect in a film released the previous year, Ikiru. Upon learning he has a terminal diagnosis, the hopeless bureaucrat, Watanabe, decides to use his little remaining time to accomplish one truly selfless act, approving a playground to be built in a neighborhood that badly needs it. Watanabe spends his final night in the newly completed playground singing the gondola song as snow falls. The changing of seasons are hugely important to Japanese art and culture, and especially to the concept of mono no aware. This scene is the first time we see snow falling in the film, and it aids in creating a melancholy but beautiful atmosphere, as well as symbolizing the final season of Watanabe's life. Ozu and Kurosawa paved the way for the Japanese New Wave, during which filmmakers like Nagisa Oshima, Shohei Imamura, and Hiroshi Teshigahara were able to develop the Japanese cinematic language even further, while still drawing from Japanese storytelling tradition. Hirokazu Korida is a contemporary director, but draws from this tradition as well. In his 2008 film Still Walking, he also utilizes a ritualized act, which is not surprisingly walking. The film depicts a family reunion and annual commemoration for the loss of their eldest son, who died 12 years prior. The stubborn patriarch of the family, Kyohei, opens the film by taking one of his daily walks around the neighborhood. This action is repeated several times by various family members in the film, and always during an emotional turning point in the story. At the midpoint, the family visits the grave of the lost son without Kyohei. While they walk, Kyohei's surviving son, Ryota, hints at the unfair expectations his father has placed on him. During the conclusion, Kyohei, Ryota, and his adopted son Atsushi all walk together. The three generations walking together suggest the various stages of life as time passes, and Ryota finally accepts his father despite his many grievances toward him. The walks allow the audience time to experience that moment in the story in full, soak it in, and through this, fully understand the emotions of the characters before the story progresses. But does Savoring the Moment extend to Japan's world-renowned animation, aka anime? Because animation is so labor-intensive, its narratives are traditionally tight and quickly paced. Every second of the final product requires considerable production time and expense, so animated films traditionally do not waste time with moments that are not pushing the story forward or engaging the audience with action. However, this classic scene from Hayao Miyazaki's 1988 film, My Neighbor Totoro, turns that notion on its head. It's rare you see this kind of pacing in animation. It allows the audience time to experience what the protagonist, Satsuki, does in a natural way. The viewer has time to experience the little details of the scene that might otherwise be overlooked. The sound of the rain and Totoro's footsteps as he walks through a puddle. The image of his wet fur as he scratches it. The dark, mysterious forest that surrounds the bus stop. The pacing of this scene allows us to experience all these little details, and as a result, we are transported to the bus stop with the characters. It is difficult to justify exactly why a shot of Totoro scratching his fur matters to the story, and yet Miyazaki knew all these little details were essential in order to create the distinct atmosphere, and fully draw the audience into the experience of the scene. Another example comes from the animated films of director Makoto Shinkai. His 2013 film, The Garden of Words, follows a young man, Takeo, who meets an older woman, Yukari, in the Shinjuku Gyoen National Garden. After he notices her, it takes a full minute before either of them speaks a word. While pauses and silences are often used to build tension in the West, this minute is strangely comfortable. The time is spent establishing the atmosphere of the scene. The sound of rain, a shot of the nearby stream, and Takeo's pencil as he sketches. As we focus on these seemingly inconsequential details, our minds shift away from anticipating what will come next, and instead begin to absorb the present moment, experiencing it as the characters do. As the story progresses, Takeo and Yukari meet regularly in the garden, and always during rainy days. Once again, these scenes become meditative and very ritualized in nature, and always achieving that beautifully sad atmosphere. Japanese gardens adhere to a long tradition of aesthetic and philosophical principles rooted in Shinto and Zen Buddhism, and are meant to provide a peaceful, harmonious experience, so the choice of setting for these meetings is very much deliberate. Early video games focused on gameplay and game mechanics. Storylines were minimal, and the experience was typically fast-paced and intense. However, if you played video games through the 80s and 90s, during the era dominated by Japanese console games, you might have found at times a more peaceful experience. In the last few years, peaceful, meditative games have developed into a fairly successful genre, but in the early days of gaming, Savoring the Moment was completely antithetical to the standard model of game design. In spite of this, Japanese developers managed to work these kinds of experiences into their games from time to time. For example, the towns in Japanese RPG games are often oddly peaceful sanctuaries, with a sentimental and sometimes melancholy atmosphere. This is in no small part aided by the stunningly emotive and ethereal music scores that somehow reached beyond the limitations of their small file size. What country other than Japan could have possibly produced a cult hit game in the mid-90s about farming? Granted, the American game Sim Farm predates it, but the 1996 Japanese game Harvest Moon manages to imbue such joy and fulfillment into the seemingly mundane act of farming. The changing of the seasons again plays a role in establishing the atmosphere. Over time, Harvest Moon and other Japanese game series like Animal Crossing helped to make these themes more prevalent in gaming, even in successful Western-produced games like Journey, Ori and the Blind Forest, and Minecraft, which also allows you to savor the moment from time to time. Considering this trend in Japanese storytelling, it may seem ironic that Japan has one of the most intense work cultures in the world. The standard long hours and constant pressure in the Japanese workplace doesn't seem very conducive towards savoring the moment. But perhaps that's why Japan needs these moments of respite and perspective. Perhaps an appreciation for the fleeting beauty of life allows Japanese society to persevere, and thus it has become an essential aspect of their storytelling style. While these concepts are somewhat foreign in the West, we could potentially learn profound things from them, not just in art, but in the way we approach life. Slowing things down from time to time to fully experience a moment, not only in joy, but also in appreciation for its fleeting beauty, is something I believe more Westerners could benefit from. But that's just my theory. If you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments below. What Japanese books, manga, films, and anime have you noticed contain a good example of savoring the moment, or mono no aware? Like and subscribe if you want to see another video covering another aspect of Japanese storytelling, or the storytelling style of another culture. Until next time, sayonara.